Cool. So, and by the way, some of the other stuff that people mentioned was like putting clothes, hair, and fur on objects. That's not necessarily something I'm gonna super go over. You can do hair if you're doing like game hair with planes and just like texture planes with cards. That's a thing. If you're interested in clothes, I might look. You could look up like Marvelous Designer. It's a pretty much program designed to put clothes on stuff. Alternately, there's like a bajillion tutorials about how to do it with end cloth. Those aren't like super things I'm going to be going over. I might shoot, if I have time, I'll see if I can get you like a at least hideous blocky humanoid figure. And yeah, so anywho, I'm just going to jump into organic modeling a little bit. So here's, I guess, my notes. But there's like, so organic modeling is basically things that have a little bit more like irregular shapes, stuff like obviously any kind of like person or animal. I honestly kind of qualify trees as organic modeling. They're kind of like mathematical or whatever, but trees are awful to model. But also stuff like plushies. I've seen a lot of you guys try to make like plushies. Even pillows can be considered organic depending on the shape that you're shooting for. And I kind of break it down into like two different groups of organic modeling. So the first one's like, you just need a thing to look like the thing. Like you just need to make the shape of that object so it looks like whatever you're trying to make. You're not animating it, it's just sitting there looking pretty. In which case you don't need to worry as much about topology. If you're making something to be animated, like a face or a character or something like that, you do actually need to pay attention to topology because how you model that shape will make your life significantly easier or significantly worse down the road. But yeah, blah, 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 cool. Yeah. And then in terms of like high poly versus low poly, it's the same, honestly, like whenever I'm doing stuff, I pretty much start out just making low poly models and then like work to higher poly. So for low poly, it's basically you just more or less stop when you have the shape that you need. You don't need to go back in and add those like 3 edge loops to hold the edge when you smooth the object. If you're going to animate them, like a character or an elbow or something, you do kind of need those loops in there, but you just don't need them for smoothing, if that makes sense. So anywho, I'm just going to jump in. So a lot of people are kind of interested in having me model like plushies, because I have seen a lot of people doing them for assignments. So if any of you guys are interested, I will pull up the files here. But in the like homework folder on Drive, or yeah, student resources, the assignments, I just made this like weird little folder for like things to live model. It's basically just some random reference pictures I collected. So I figured if anyone has, preferences, I just have like a bunch of weird plushies that I can model for you guys. So does anyone have a preference for which one I sort of live demo? Which this guy? Yes. I considered making these. They'd be so easy. All right, so I could be a real person and actually put this into Maya. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna be a real person for once.
Can you use ZBrush also for living?
No, I mean, I think you can. Honestly, my experience with ZBrush is limited mostly to texturing or similar, where I like have the base model.
Oh, like the spacing maps and stuff?
Yeah. So I do mostly sculpting in ZBrush, but you can do like really crazy stuff. You can like build a whole person out of a sphere if you want to. It's just like not something I play with, but there's a lot of good tutorials and stuff online if that's something that you want to get into. But yeah, again, it just like depends on your workflow. Like I prefer working and like having control over what I'm doing and then like sculpting in fine details later, whereas some people are like completely the opposite. So kind of 6 1/2 dozen. All right, so I'm just gonna go and throw in an image plane of this derpy little dinosaur dude. I am excited that someone chose that guy because I think he's adorable. All right, blah, plushies. Oh God, coefficient. Just cute. Like who doesn't want plushie tortellini, guys? All right, here's my dude. What?
You're not wrong.
Oh, I know. I actually made a plushie steak like 3 years ago. It's still sitting around my apartment. I don't know what I'm doing with it.
Do you think ever 3D print one?
A plushie steak?
Yeah.
Why would I? Why? Could I? Yes, I have 3 printers at my disposal. Would I? No. It would, and then I could bring it into class and be like, hey everyone, we're eating fake 3D printed plastic steak. Enjoy your suffering. Anywho. God. Anyway. Alright, so to start out making something like this, I look at, if you're doing plushies in particular, they have, so like if you look at, and of course I closed Photoshop. I hate everything. That's what Microsoft Paint is for, guys. It saddens me that I have to pull up Microsoft Paint in an animation class. But anywho, all right. So if you look at stuff like this, and again, plushies in particular, I think are interesting to look at in terms of organic modeling, just because they are basically made from flat pieces of cloth that are attached together differently. So like for this guy, you can see, and I've actually kind of studied how these are made, but like basically his entire side is just like one little piece of felt that's cut out to be shaped like the side of a dinosaur. And then basically the top of him is like a very long triangle, so it's like the base is thicker here, and then it gets skinnier and skinnier, and that's how they create that tapering towards his back. And then all of these guys, like these little back spike things, are again pretty much just flat things that have been attached together. And that's one way you can actually sort of start assembling this guy, is like literally making him as a flat piece of geometry and then just sort of stitching planes together. And again, that's like, a lot of times I will straight up just start with a plane for a plushie. So, oh god, it's made me, no. And I'm just gonna go to create polygon primitives and turn on interactive creation because I hate automatic planes. So I'm just gonna like throw in a plane. It's not gonna be pretty, but like cool. Here's his torso. Give me some here. Actually, let me. There we go. All right. So here we have like pretty much again the beginning of this guy's little body. I'm just gonna grab these vertices and just sort of like shape them, and then I'm just gonna go along each edge, and just very crudely shape the side of this plushie. It's gonna be gorgeous. Just go in and kind of like tweak some vertices around. And this is like mostly, honestly, a lot of what organic modeling is. It's just sort of like putting in relatively low poly stuff and then blocking in the shape sort of as you go. So again, this is like literally just me starting from a flat plane, and eventually I will shape this a little bit more later, possibly with deformers, depending on how lazy I'm being. So here's this little dude's body. It's super gorgeous. I'm gonna extrude him some feet. He now has feet. All right, so we have, again, like here's his little body. You can see it's pretty much dinosaur shaped. And it's like really gross and blocky and low poly, and it doesn't look nice, but again, later problems. Yes. I don't even know what the heck this looks like, honestly, but certainly not a dinosaur at this point. So at this point, like, what I would probably end up doing is going in and blocking in a little bit more geometry, because I don't want him to look like this. It's sad. So one reason I actually kind of work like this with plushies, I like having edge loops running along the seams, and I'll show you this in a sec, but when the model is like less horrific, but it does make it really, really easy to go through and like model in seams if you need that in your model. It also makes it way easier to texture the guy. So anywho, I'm just gonna go in. So it does look like he has some little folds on his feet where you can kind of see there's like a little crease like this. And it looks like that's on both feet. So I'm just gonna add in one edge loop on each of those feet and maybe grab this vert and just sort of pull it up so I have the basic shape. It's like this geometry here is sort of tracing that little fold in his body. And I'll do that back here as well. So now I have this still kind of sad looking little dinosaur. I might go back in and like actually add more edge loops like a real person now. So in case I didn't mention this before, so by default, the insert edge loop tools, this is me just like clicking, throwing an edge loop in, you can see that it's just putting it on this flat line, pretty much. If you press and hold shift while you insert that edge loop tool, it'll actually, you can see it's like curving the top of the body. It's basically adding the loop where it thinks it would be if the model was smooth, if that makes sense. But it does sort of save you, like I can go back in and just sort of like shift add edge loops, and you can see it's rounding out the tail a little bit nicer. And it might save you a little bit of trouble manually shaping these later, if that makes sense. So again, just standard insert edge loop tool, I'm just holding shift while I put the edge loop in, and it'll sort of interpolate between the two edges as it does that. So I just sort of like shift some of this stuff around, and I don't know, it's close enough. Close enough. So at this point, like, he does kind of look more dinosaur-y, but he's also very flat, which is not so much what I want here. So in this case, the first thing I'm probably going to do, so he has like a pretty clear defined curve like on the side of his body where he's poofed out. So I'm just going to throw in another edge loop, and I will grab in a somewhat arbitrary fashion. And here's just like where it just gets down to just kind of just randomly moving things till you get the shape you want. So I'm just going to grab some of the loops on the inside of his body, turn on soft select. Okay, fine. I don't know. And then I'm just going to sort of smush those out, which looks terrible. Maybe grab some more loops. I don't know. And try dragging these out. Close enough, sort of. We're going to run with it. So this one is actually kind of like awkward to shape like this, but so you can see I'm just going to go through and actually just sort of manually grab these and just drag them out to make a little bit of a bend in this guy's body. And I also might grab these and just sort of like squish those down. Pull this out slightly. So this is like, again, half of like what organic modeling is. It's pretty much just shaping flat objects to be something slightly more interesting. And you can see, I mean, this is like not the sexiest example of a dinosaur pillow, but it is, you know, starting to take on the shape of this guy here. So at this point, what I would probably do is I'm going to start like blocking in more of the dinosaur shape. So I do want that sort of like little triangular patch on his nose area, and also the shape of his underbody. So in this case, I mean, I could block in that geometry. I'm probably just going to bridge the two halves together because I'm super lazy that way. So what I'm going to do is actually take this plane, and I am going to, I want it rotated so that I have the space to keep his little head where it is. In this case, so you notice like if I rotate it, it's sort of changing the shape in relation to this little orthographic I've drawn in. So I'm actually going to deformer this just to bend it like a weirdo. So I don't think I went over lattice deformers. They're fairly straightforward. So if you go up to your deform menu, and again, if anyone has questions as I'm going, just let me know. I do have these pictures of these little dinosaur up on Drive if you want to fiddle with him on your own time or whatever. Or now, whatever suits your boat. But yeah, so go up to the deform menu, and you'll see this little bubble or this little drop down for lattice deformer. I'm just going to open that. And basically, if you've ever used, I think it's like a warp deformer in Photoshop, it's pretty much the same thing, just on a 3D scale. So once you make the deformer, it's going to put this little box around your object, and you can then go through and just sort of like drag these around wherever you need them to deform your object. So you can put as many divisions as just like how many divisions are actually in your lattice deformer. In this case, I'm just going to be lazy and leave it as is because it doesn't really matter. But what I'm going to do is just take all of the lattice points on this end, and I will just drag them over a little bit. And you can see, so if I look here, you can see that it's not really changing the shape of the object in relation to the orthographic. So it is just sort of stretching these over in space. So now I have a tail that is pretty much right on the origin, and my face is again pulled over a little bit. So anyone have any questions about the lattice deformer? All right. Again, it is pretty much just like a 3D warp deformer in Photoshop. So I'm just going to go ahead and say I'm happy with that shape. I will just delete history on that object. I'm just using the hotkey Alt-Shift-D. It's also just edit, delete by type history. So I would like this guy to have a second half of his body. So in this case, I'm just going to, you'll notice that the pivot of this object is still pretty much on the x-axis. It's basically flat at the origin. So I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate this little dinosaur guy and scale him -1. No, Z. Cool. So I just scaled him -1 on the Z. And you can see that now he's basically lining up where like his tail is attached and the front of his body, he's going to have a really wide head. And the front of his body is sort of wider. So if you guys are ever doing anything where you are like setting scale to be negative, I would highly, highly, highly recommend delete or freezing transformations on your scale. Sometimes we're going to right click and do freeze scale, or you could just hit this little snowflake with the 0, 0, 0. But you'll notice that as soon as I do that, it's actually flipped the normals of this object. So you'll see, like, if I'm looking at it here, it's basically both faces are pointing the same way. In this case, this new half that I made is pointing into the center of the plushie. Not so much what I want. So I'm just going to go to Mesh Display and reverse that. And you can see that now both parts of his body are actually facing outwards, like I want and expect. So any questions on how we got here to this point? All right. I am basically just going through and like whatever, I'm just sort of basically making pattern pieces and just stitching them together. All right. So just for organization, pseudo-organization, I just sort of group these together, and then I'm just going to mesh combine these pieces. And again, once you do that, I highly recommend deleting history, because otherwise it'll leave a bunch of extra crap in your outliner, and if you accidentally delete it, it'll delete half your object, and it's like a whole thing. So if I do a mesh combine, usually I'll just delete history immediately to avoid issues. It also does really help clean up the outliner. So anywho, so these guys are one piece now. So I'm just going to go through, and I'll just manually, because I'm feeling lazy, combine their little tail pieces together. And I'm just selecting these vertices and doing merge to center. So now his tail is connected, and that's all good. So the next thing that I want to do is, I'm going to say, I want to make this little yellow patch on his face. So you can see that like his stomach is white and his upper part is yellow. So I'm just going to sort of start there, and again, just make that little yellow piece. And to do that, I'm just going to sort of append this dude like that. And then I'm just going to bridge these pieces together and maybe sort of leave it like that. So I'm leaving this like tiny little piece of his tail at the end, because having that will kind of break the bridge. So I want basically two rows of loops selected. Instead of, if I had these last little end guys here, it would just be basically a single loop, and bridge tool wouldn't work on that. So I'm just going to do edit mesh bridge. Cool. And I will add a single division into here. Dear God, this is terrifying. Ugh. Ugh. Okay. Anyway, and then I'm just going to run through like really quick and patch this awkward little hole tail, or tail hole. And I'm just going to append that shut. So it looks like a triangle, but it is actually a quad, so I should be able to just close that off again with one little append in there. And you'll see that once I do that, it does smooth pretty nicely at the end. And then same thing here, it actually 100% would have made more sense to just, I don't know why I appended that together, that was kind of dumb. So I'm just going to select these two edges and do edit mesh bridge again, add another division, and then I just need to join these little verts together. So notice like right now, and this is like, still it's just like a thing that pops up. If you guys are ever, looking at your model and toggling between like unsmoothed and smoothed, if you ever notice like weird hard lines in your model like this when it's smoothed, that's usually an indication of some kind of geometry issue. In this case, it's basically, I haven't merged these two vertices, so there is like a giant hole in my mesh. Since it's the end of a mesh, it doesn't know how to smooth that, so it's just leaving it, and that's why you're getting that hard line. Does that make sense? Cool. So I'm just going to grab these two vertices here, and not this one. And you'll notice that once I merge those to center, it smooths much nicer and actually looks like what you would expect. So So I'm pretty much just going to go through and do that on the bottom half of the dinosaur as well. Strictly speaking, there was no real reason that I didn't do... I'm not going to do the legs. I'll just get back to those in a sec. But there's no particular reason I didn't just do this all at once. Just like, my brain is like, I'm going to make the yellow piece and then I'm going to make the white piece because it just sort of seems to make sense, again, to my weird head. So I'm just going to grab pretty much all of the loops except his legs on the bottom of this guy. And again, just do an edit mesh bridge. What are you doing? Have I misselected something? All right. Totally should be the same number of loops. All right, I'm going to start with each piece individually and then bridge those. Edit mesh bridge. All right, cool. Actually, I have no idea what taper does. All right, so again, I'm just going to do the front of him. I will do the middle, and I'm just going to add one division as I go because I do just kind of like to have that extra geometry. I do actually find it really helpful when I'm doing any kind of like organic anything. I do like to have one single edge loop if possible running down like the dead center of the object. So like if you look at them from the front view, I don't know what the heck this looks like, but you will notice there is like this one loop that is just running pretty much straight down the center of the dude. And that just helps like if you're doing symmetry, which I'll get to in a second, but if you're using symmetry, it just makes your life super easier for that kind of stuff. So now I basically have the body of this little dude. And his legs are still empty, and that's kind of fine for now. So the body of this guy is basically like, prepare yourself for a horrible drawing in MS Paint. The body of him is basically just like this. It's pretty much a triangle with little legs on it, and then, oh my god, and then they just bend the legs. And that's pretty much what the bottom of this piece looks like. This makes me sad. So that's like more or less what I was sort of trying to replicate here. So in this case, I'm just sort of I'm just sort of starting to block in that little bottom white plane. Caps lock. So in this case, I still have clearly like a giant hole in this dude's bottom. So I'm just gonna start patching those. And as I do this, because I'm shooting to get right now sort of yellow. I just want this shape here. I'll add the legs in like 10 seconds and then join them back in with the original legs. So again, I'm just shooting for like closed piece of geometry here, so I'm just going to select those edges and do edit mesh bridge. And as I'm doing this, I'm looking at the original mesh and saying, okay, so this has one loop in the middle of that foot, so I'm going to need another division in the middle of this bottom piece here. So I'm going to throw in a division and pretty much do the exact same thing down here. I'm just going to bridge these guys and throw in a single division. Keep plus praying taper. And here we have our very ugly looking little dinosaur dude. So I'm just gonna, I've just sort of not been merging stuff, so I'm gonna, again, grab, so if I look at this, there's still a hole in his nose because of the way I was working. And in this case, I'm kind of tipped off by that, or like tipped off to that issue because I can see here, there's like this really weird sort of pull happening in his face. So usually if I see something like that where it's a smooth model and there's like a really aggressive like spike in one of the lines that I would otherwise expect to be smooth, usually that's a sign of not having geometry merged. So I'm just gonna, again, grab that nose, merge it to center, and you can see that that pretty much fixes that weird like topology spike in his nostril. So at this point what I'm gonna do is actually turn on symmetry because I do love me some symmetry. So if you guys have never played with it, it's up here, just like just casually hanging out under the deform menu. And there's two types of symmetry. Usually I just work with object symmetry because it seems easier. Object symmetry is going to work even if you have your object rotated like a 45-degree angle because it's working. Same thing with like the gimbals that I showed you last week. It's just working off of the object's rotation. World scale is pretty much, you know, it draws a grid on the actual grid in Maya and just works off that. So in this case, I think it's object X? No. So in this case, I want object Z. So I can never remember which symmetry axis I want, so I'll just sort of click on invert, and if it selects the one on the other side, then I'm like, cool, I have the right axis. So in this case, I'm just going to poof out those legs a little bit, because they look a little flat and, like, honestly kind of creepy. So I'll just do a little teeny bit of shaping on both the outside and inside parts of those legs. And I might also just go through and, like, round out the bottom of him slightly, because it's kind of creepy and flat. So I mean, here, like, honestly, this doesn't look completely horrendous. I did forget a little hole in his tail again. Always the tail holes. Boop. Alright, cool. Alright, and then to get the rest of the little holes in his legs, I'm basically going to just grab these little sad, awkward, like, leg holes, these little inner loops on the leg hole, on what would be the white part of his belly, and I'm just going to extrude those down. Just like plain, simple extrude. And then pretty much I'm just going to go through and sort of merge all of the vertices together. And this is going to like flatten out the legs pretty aggressively, but I will fix that momentarily. So I'm just going to, again, just go through and just be like, aha, great. I forgot I had symmetry on. I'm like, what is happening? But you can see, like, as soon as I do that, like right now the legs, they end up being like a little bit pointy, so I will add a little more geometry to help sort of define that curve. And again, just merging all the vertices together, and now we have, you know, what looks like an actual pudgy little something of a dinosaur, sort of. It is. It's, thank you. Makes me feel a little better about this. But anywho, so I did mention that these legs look really horrible. So like, and here's my shtick on, like pointy things, I guess. Weird way to phrase that, but like this is really like bizarrely sharp. I usually, especially on something like a plushie, I wouldn't expect to see like this crazy point at the bottom of there. So again, I'm just gonna go with my insert edge loop tool, and I'm going to throw in another edge loop. So this is the edge loop that it adds. Just if I just click on the edge normally, I'll do on the front ones, I'll do a shift click, and you can see that it kind of poofs out the geometry a little bit, so the leg is like ever so slightly less spiky and horrifying. It's a little bit subtle, but it does kind of make a difference. I'm actually just going to undo and re-add in those loops on the back leg. And at this point, I can go in and like really like actually start doing some more shaping to make this look significantly less horrible, and really like actually, you know, just making this look nicer. So I could spend like a bunch of time shaping this, but I'm not super going to. I'm just gonna, oh my god, this thing is so creepy. And again, you could add, you know, if you needed more or less edge loops to define like the sort of fluff in his side, it probably would make more sense to have, you know, maybe like 2 or 3 loops running horizontally along his body instead of 1. But again, purposes of demo. So if you wanted to go in and like set up the seams on the side of his body, again, the way that this has been set up is like pretty straightforward to do that. Which is why if I'm building a plushie, I kind of like working with this, where it's like, imagine everything is in plane, and like if there's a change in fabric color, because it's like a different color of cloth, not just like a textured fabric, I would like build in geometry lines there. So what I'm actually going to do is, where am I going? I'm going to throw in another edge loop on each side of this guy's sad little body. And I'm just going to throw one sort of randomly in his center. And then, so and this is like me working on defining where the seams in his body are. So I also need some like on the bottom of his legs. This person did a horrible job stuffing his feet. But yeah, so again, there's like throwing some little loops by this guy's leg, kind of calling it, I don't know, nothing like terribly pretty. And I might need to go and like terminate some of these loops later, but like for now, this is gonna do pretty much what I need. Also make him very spiky. So again, so at this point what I can do is fairly easily go through and select, I need to do like a little bit of manual selecting around the legs, and like deselect here, but you can see what this is giving me is like pretty much a relatively solid ring of geometry, like right around that stitch on his side. Which again is just like, depending on how you need to set up your model and how you like working. Like I personally think it's a lot easier to go through and do something like this compared to maybe like going in and sculpting a seam in ZBrush. It's just like, I just don't personally like doing that. And I'm sort of like fudging the back end of the tail because I like didn't do a super great job on that. But at this point what I can do, and I'll grab these little center guys, I'm just going to extrude all of these faces. So again, you can kind of see I'm basically just, I've gone through and I've sort of traced the seams on this guy's body more or less. And I could do a better job with this, but I'm just going to extrude those and like poke them outwards. Oh God. And maybe scale them slightly somehow. Nope. Or not. We cannot scale these because that's an awkward decision. All right. I broke something in his feet. But like you can more or less go in and just like, you know, sort of block in. So now I have like those seams physically on the dinosaur's body. Which again, like depending on your preferences and how you like working, I would 100% rather work off something like this in ZBrush than I would just sort of having to sculpt in those seams manually. I'm also weird just like modeling, but yeah. So does anyone have any questions about like anything I've done so far for this? All right. I mean, this is like more or less, why do I, oh yeah, I'm merging to center, duh. But this is like honestly more or less how I make plushies. I think you just, you know, if you needed to like add in loops to sort of like harden that little seam area in here. And then you might need to like play, because again, I got like a really weird looking extrude on that, so you can play with like the positioning of the seams. In this case, I would normally like terminate this geometry here, because it is making like kind of a hard line on the side of him. But in this case, I was just complaining about like not quite having enough topology on his body, so I might just be like, hey, he's rounder now, and just sort of use that to my advantage, and just sort of spread it out, like smooth him out by just spreading out this geometry enough where it's not affecting really the mesh and like making everything look super crazy. The other thing that you can do, like this works really well on flat surfaces. If you're doing curved surfaces, sometimes it kind of like flattens them a little weird. But it's a tool called average vertices. So if you go into edit mesh and average vertices, you can see that it's flattening the geometry, but it's also spreading it out so it's not crushed on top of each other as much. At which point I can then sort of take it and like pull it back out. So now I have, you know, a slightly more rounded dinosaur. And like down here I might go and like actually merge these, but yeah. And then, so I did have, so like right at the beginning, remember I added these like weird little like nubs here for that fold. So I'm just gonna see what happens if I go in and like add another edge loop to try to harden that out ever so slightly, so that that fold kind of shows up more. And you can see that doing that has made it show up a little bit more. If I wanted to sort of push that a little bit further, I could either, with that new edge loop I just added, I'll just push that back into the mesh a little bit, and then I can like, you know, pull this guy out, and now it kind of looks like he has like a little bit of folding in his sad fabric leg. And then just like, I'm just sort of working, so I'm noticing like there's like a weird sort of pull and like a hard line here. And I'm like, well, that's actually kind of convenient. Like that new edge loop I just added would be great. I can just take that and merge it to center and then get rid of one of these extra loops. And now his body goes back to being plush, soft, and round. So that's like pretty much, if I were to make, you know, plushies or like similar shapes to this, how I usually handle it. It is just sort of thinking about it as like what shape is the flat piece of fabric, and then just sort of modeling from that, if that makes sense. And then, like, again, same process for these little scales. I'd probably just start with a plane, poof it out a little bit, and then just, like, attach it together. Or it's just start with a cube, kind of whichever. But does anyone have any questions on this? All right. I might actually save this for once, because I do think it's kind of cute. Dino plush. All right. Cool. I'm just making sure that I actually. All right. So that's basically plushies. It seems like people were also a fan of like seeing me speed modeling a head and seeing how much head I can get through in like 15 minutes. So and I can't tell if that's because you're curious or you want to judge the head that I come up with after 15 minutes. Honestly, either one's fine. So I can model a head that looks reasonably like a person in about 2 hours. In 15 minutes, you're gonna get something that's like god-awfully terrifying.
I would love